Okay, folks, usually I do this in class, but since I'm not here, I'm going to do it on the video. So I want you to really think about what I'm saying and we'll go from there. So what I want to talk about are the high school math recommendations that I'm making for you and things you need to consider and things that I consider. So a typical high school math course sequence looks something like this. In ninth grade, you take Algebra 1. Most of the kids at Clayton, with the exception of those already in Algebra 1, will be taking Algebra 1 next year. In 10th grade, then geometry or formal geometry. In 11th grade, Algebra 2 or Algebra 2 honors. And in 12th grade, they may take a pre-college math. This is a remedial math class designed to help students understand Algebra 1 and geometry and Algebra 2, which they obviously didn't do the first time. Or a probability, statistics, and discrete math class. That's a pretty low-level class. Or trig pre-calculus, and that's where I would expect most of your caliber to go. So what happens if you're in the magnet instead? Well, to begin with, these two classes from 9th and 10th grade have already been covered in Integrated 1 and Integrated 2. So if you are successful in both Integrated 1 and Integrated 2, by my estimation, then you will have completed the course requirements for Algebra 1 and formal geometry. Now, that means that in 9th grade, you'll go to Algebra 2 honors. In a few exceptions, I might suggest Algebra 2 if I don't think the work ethic is there to be successful in Algebra 2 honors. Then in 10th grade, you would go to Trig Pre-Calc. 11th grade, you would either take AP Calculus or AP Stats, or both. And then in 12th grade, you would flip-flop them. So if you took AP Stats in 11th grade, you'd take AP Calc in 12th grade. Or you might take a dual credit class from TMCC or UNR, which would give you both high school credit and university credit. For example, you may take Calc 3, which is the third semester of calculus. So some important things to be considering. And these are considerations that I take into account when I make my recommendations. They're considerations you and your parents need to take into account when you decide on what math course you're going to take, and in fact, what all courses you're going to take in high school. So first of all, the transition to high school from middle school can be really difficult. There's a lot less structure in high school. You have an open lunch, so you can go off campus and disappear. Nobody's checking up on you, so that if you're not doing your homework, nobody's going to know, really, except you and your parents. And they're not going to let you stall out makeup work forever or turn in a bunch of late papers at the end of the semester because you suddenly keyed in that you need to. So that transition for a lot of students can be difficult. And if you're not successful the first semester in high school, it really puts you back. At that point, then you're credit deficient and you're going to have to make up that course in some way. Fortunately for you, your magnet experience will make this much easier. You've learned how to balance your time, you've learned that you have to do homework, and you developed a better work ethic than a lot of students. Nevertheless, for some of you, that transition could be an issue. If you are weak in Algebra 1 or geometry, you will not be successful in Algebra 2 or Trig Pre-Calc. We know that from experience, not just in the magnet, but all the way through school. So if we let students who are weak in algebra or geometry go on to Algebra 2, and they do, then they fail Algebra 2. And it's really not a very positive experience. So it's very important to me that you have a solid background in Algebra 1 and geometry before I recommend you in Algebra 2. Because otherwise what happens is you fail Algebra 2, and you've already, in essence, taken Algebra 1 and geometry. We can't put you back. So you have to go back to Algebra 2 and pick up those missing skills in some way so you're successful in Algebra 2. It's not a positive experience, so we want to prevent that if at all possible. The other thing we know is that work ethic plays a huge part in your high school success. There can be students who are weak in Algebra 1 and geometry and still succeed in Algebra 2 and Trig Pre-Calc and on because of their work ethic. I'm a good example of that. But it's very important that I pay attention to your work ethic and that you pay attention also, because if you continue in some cases the way you are right now, you're not going to be successful in high school in the way you are. Finally, you and your parents really make the final decision about which courses you take next year. So it's very important that you actually sit down with your parents, that you discuss our recommendations, and that you discuss the options you have available to you and make a good decision for what you take. To be really honest with you, I tend to go toward the ceiling. In other words, I'm going to suggest Algebra 2 for you if I think that you have the background. And you may not be very comfortable doing that. You may think, well, maybe I would be better off with a better background in algebra or a better background in geometry, or I'm worried that I'm going to be overwhelmed with the work. And that's okay. Really, you're so far advanced from everybody else. It's not going to hurt you if you take a little bit of time to get your math background up, or your experience in high school. However, my experience has been that for the most part, where I recommend students is a good place for them and they're very successful in high school. Now, this is all a background to tell you that these are the kinds of considerations I take when I make recommendations. For the most part, I'm really feeling good about the recommendations I've made. But I'm a little iffy in a couple of cases. There are some of you who have worked very, very hard. I think your knowledge level is a little bit lacking, or your confidence level is a little bit lacking, and I've made some other recommendations. This is where you really need to think carefully about what you're doing. And it's also an important place for you to talk with me. So there's going to be two things. I'm going to open a discussion in classroom, and I want you as a group of students to post questions or thoughts for everybody to comment on. So if you have some general questions like what happens if my high school doesn't offer formal geometry or honors algebra or something like that, post them there and we can answer them. What if I don't want to take trig pre-calculus in 11th grade? Are there other options? And then secondly, Edmodo or email me privately if you have personal concerns or questions about my recommendation or about where you think you should go. And I'd like you and your parents to email me if they have concerns or questions. I'll be glad to answer them, and I think maybe it'll make you feel a little better. Finally, the last thing I want to tell you is that I have a lot of faith in what you guys are capable of doing. I do not want to recommend you for a lower level class when I think you're capable of a higher level class. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to believe that you can't do, and I don't want you to believe that, because you can do. But on the other hand, I know there are a lot of situations that you're aware of that I'm not, and so what you do with your high school courses really needs to be a very careful consideration on your part and on your parents' part.